I grew up such a fan of sports memorabilia and sports cards, and I'm really excited that this show is both going to highlight that as well as the awesome entrepreneurs that make it all possible. Let's do it. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back into season 3 of Talking Shop. Today is a first of its kind because we have a numismatist, and that is because we have Aris from Stacks Bowers. My friend, how are you doing?
I'm doing well, brother. How are you?
I'm great. For everybody wondering what the word that I just struggled to pronounce means, what is a numismatist?
So, a numismatist is basically an expert in the field or a collector in the field of collectible money, be it coins, be it banknotes, etc. Typically, in the banknote world, it's mostly used for coin guys, but banknote guys could consider themselves a numismatist as well. Numismatics is the field of coins and paper money.
Amazing. So just to dive right into it, for somebody like myself who knows nothing about the coin and currency world, all I know is that it's never a bad thing to buy gold. It's never a bad thing to buy silver. And if it's in a coin form, great. But that's pretty much the extent of what I know. For somebody like myself, what are the important things to know? What are the holy grails of the coin world? What would you tell yourself just getting into this?
Well, that's a really loaded question only because it's kind of like saying, what the holy grail of cards or any other collectible.
Right.
It's more a matter of preference and finding your niche in this vast world. Um, you know, every single country in the world has money. Every single country has a history since its inception of money of some form. And we'll dive into some of the different types of money that there is. But I think the main thing to think about is obviously quality is important, condition, the rarity. Um, but really, it's about what speaks to you. And for some people, it's a story that you associate with the item. And for other people, it's, oh, this is worth, 250,000. So because it's worth 250,000, I want it. They're tangible assets, even though we steer clear of calling them assets per se, but that's what they are essentially. A lot of people come into money, they sell a house, they sell a sport card, and they say, all right, well, what am I going to do with these profits? I want to pour it into something else. And they look for this world of numismatics, which is, pretty much flying under the radar compared to all the other collectibles. Yet, if you look at the past 15 years, it's the only one that really has a steady trajectory of interest and profitability time over time. Of course, like anything, there's the dips. But for the most part, if you bought something 50 years ago and you go to sell it today, you're making money no matter what it is. So that's the real interesting facet of it that I think, there are guys that might get mad that, it's just kind of showing you all of these things, but really at the same time, we need new blood in the hobby. And I'm probably one of the youngest people in it, especially at the level that I operate at in terms of, being as frequently involved in shows and auctions, etc. Primarily, it's an older man's game. And, with the internet, it's the final frontier to be modernized and find, who's going to be the guy that figures out, how to bring this whole entire world of collectibles together.
I love that. What's the biggest coin sale ever? Are you familiar? Like, is there a 52 mantle or a 19206 Honus Wagner of coins and
Yeah, absolutely. It was actually sold by my firm, and it was the
okay.
1804 flowing hair. And I'll get you a picture of that. And I don't know, maybe if we could put like an inset of it or something in post, but it sold for $10 million. And there's been a list of probably um, 15 or 20 coins that have sold above the $1 million mark in the past decade or so. But that's definitely the creme de la creme. It's a beautiful coin to look at, but they call it the flowing hair dollar because there's essentially a bust and the hair is flowing and it's got like this little rainbow tone. It's really nice. But as far as coins go, we are having auctions periodically. Usually we do every 2 or 3 months a major auction for all of our different departments. We have US coins, world coins, we have US paper, world paper, and speaking of coins, we've got this here. It's an 1876 CC, which means Carson City, and they printed about 6,800 examples of this, and the estimated value is about 150,000. It's the second finest example known, which is pretty crazy. I mean, like, I'm holding a coin that's essentially, at one point was a $5 coin, and here it is, and it's six figures. It's just absolutely wild, and it's tiny. I mean, it's not even the size of a panini sticker. It's a little miniature, but it's just so cool. And this one's a 62. The company that graded it is PCGS, which is owned by Collectors Universe. So PSA, it's their sister company basically, and they're one of the top grading companies, obviously, for coins. NGC, which is CSG's or CGC's sister company, is their rival.
What's the grading system for coins? How is it different from cards?
So cards are on a 10-point scale for the most part. Coins and banknotes are on a 70-point scale. So when you get to 60 and above, it's basically, a 9.5 or better.
Right.
And, it's really difficult to get 70s. Most of the 70s are really modern stuff. Very seldom will you see anything prior to 1950 get a 70. It's just, especially with paper, there's so many little things that can go wrong, or the centering's not perfect off the bat. But it's on a 70-point scale. Obviously, the higher the number, the better the grade. And I would say it goes where, 10 to or 0 to 15 is essentially what would be like your 2s or 3s and below. And the 60 or better would be your 10s or your 9.5s. And then the 40 to 58 range would be like your 8s to 9s.
So you were saying you were saying that coins are much more popular in this world than paper currency. Is that true?
Yeah, and that's mainly because coins have their bullion value too. There's a lot of you can buy coins from the early 1900s that are just worth their weight in gold for the most part. Maybe a small premium, a couple points above melt, but there's always been guys that will buy tubes of gold and put it away in a safe, or tubes of silver coins and put them away in the safe because they'll hold their melt value. And of course, there's, if you were to take apples to apples, the top 50 coins and the top 50 banknotes, the top 5 coins will probably pay for the other 50 banknotes in terms of value. So that's been the trajectory since the beginning of time. So I think what happens is, most people have gravitated towards that, and it's a lot easier for coin shops and pawn shops and all these other people to get involved with coins. Whereas with banknotes, it's a little more complex. There's so many intricacies when you're looking at banknotes. They're not easily counterfeited, but there are counterfeits of banknotes, and you just really got to know what you're looking at. And as a banknote guy, I kind of appreciate that aspect of it. And the coin guys will say, they're probably a lot more passionate about coins than I am. I'm a little aloof about coins for the most part, but on the banknote side, yeah, it's a smaller niche market that's growing. It's definitely, since I started even 8 years ago, it's been growing exponentially year over year. There's younger guys at shows. If you travel to Europe, there's these big shows in Asia. We have a Hong Kong show, and it is wall to wall people. You have to hold your backpack on the floor as you walk by, because there's no room to get by anybody with a backpack. And that's basically, we look at Asia as the mirror for the hobby of where it's going. And when you see that at a show and that much excitement, and they're predominantly our age, it's like 30 and below. It's not a lot of older guys in Asia in this hobby. So that shows sustainability to someone like me, and it kind of puts my mind at ease when I'm worrying, like, what's going to happen when all these old collectors pass away? Who's going to help sustain this market? Will I still have a job, etc.? But I mean, we're seeing this past year, we've seen so much interest, and the year prior to that we did as well. So I'm not going to say it's just the result of COVID and collectibles booming, but there's certainly been an added pump of interest and people falling in love with all their old collections and their little binders that they had as a kid. So we are seeing a lot of that too.
Wow. Now, in terms of some of these banknotes, obviously the one that most people are familiar with in being somewhat collectible is the $2 bill. The $2 American dollar. Everybody knows about it. It's probably the only collectible dollar that everybody has at least held one at some point.
Oh yeah.
I feel like that. It's not a stretch to say that.
No, I don't think so.
What is the story behind the $2 bill, and is it worth more or less than $2?
So it's funny because I was staying in Brooklyn for a weekend a few years ago, and I had just I wanted to do something interesting, and I thought would be funny and just strange. And I was staying in this area that's kind of in like Greenpoint / Williamsburg, like near the park over there.
Mm.
And there was a few pizzerias and coffee shops that I knew I was going to spend the entire time eating at. So I went to the bank and I bought a stack of $2 bills, which you can still do today.
Really?
And these places are all cash only. So I only paid in $2 bills the entire trip. And by like the third or fourth day, I was walking into the place and I go to pay with the $2 bills. And the guy's like, "Oh, you're the guy paying with $2 bills," because I started to build like this little reputation, this one little week in Brooklyn from spending $2 bills. But it was something that way back when it made more sense. Before inflation, a $2 bill was probably what a $10 bill is today. So at the time, it made a lot of sense to have them. Now today, there's not a lot of use for them. The same way there's not a lot of use for coins for the most part. So they phased out, and that's really just as simple as just not a big need for it. Same with like the $50 bills. You don't see a lot of $50 bills in circulation. They're just not as useful. For the most part, something's $85 or it's $22 or $23. So you're not using a $50 bill often. But I personally love $2 bills, and I'll be in New York next week. I'll probably pull out another pack of $2 bills and I'll just start using them at the coffee shops again.
So I could go to a bank, probably not any bank, but I could find a bank that has $2 bills available, and I could give them 100 and get 50 $2 bills.
Yeah.
Wow.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
So there's no collectability. There's no collectability there.
It depends. I mean, a lot of people there's people collect all sorts of things, as I'm sure you're aware, but there's, before bills, there's prefixes, right? There's GA prefixes and there's XF suffixes, and some people like certain initials. And people collect $2 bills based off of prefixes. They look for star notes, which are basically just replacement notes that the mint puts a little star at the end of the serial number on. There are rare $2 bills. Definitely, they exist. There's $2 error notes, which are really cool. But it's when we're talking, auction type material, there's not a lot of $2 bills apart from like the really old large size bills, which I can basically show you kind of what I'm talking about. But they're large size $2 bills that are heavily collectible. And the amount, it's funny what's happened to paper money in the US. Every other country, their money has gotten exponentially nicer looking and cooler looking from like a plain Jane. And in the US, we went from having really cool, really pretty, really beautiful money to just this ugly generic constant since about 1928. Our money has not changed. A couple serial number colors, a couple seal colors, but it's pretty much the same old same. And that's been really weird. So coming into my bag here, like I was saying, 1861 to 1928, we printed large size bills, which for reference is about this size.
Wow.
which is almost, well, here's a small size, but you can kind of see the difference in size.
So people used to have those in their pockets back in the day?
Yeah, they did. And what's incredible is you'll still find notes that have never been folded. To get the 60 grade or higher,
Right.
it needs to be uncirculated, meaning it's never been folded at any point, meaning into the corners of the design, the middle, a trifold, no folds at all. That's how you get a 60 or higher. And usually it's a 63 or 64. There's not a lot of 61s or 62s out there. But when we started printing money, it was always this size, this bigger thing. And there was $1 bills, there was $2 bills, $5 bills. So the $2 bills in this size are really collectible.
That's amazing.
There's just, but this here is a $500 bill. So
what does something like that cost?
So this particular note, there's a few things that's special about it, but it's a Dallas district. There's 12 districts for the Federal Reserve Bank. 12 different areas that, are districts that will show up. So you'll have a K, which you see right here, which basically means it's the Dallas district. If you have an A, it's the Boston district. A B is the New York district. So the Dallas district, for whatever reason, it brings a premium. And this particular example is a 45. So we would probably equate that to about an 8. But where you see it says EPQ on the side, that means it's exceptional paper quality, which means it was fully original. So that means it hasn't had any stains, it hasn't been kicked on the floor, and collectors, more so than whether or not something's uncirculated, sometimes they care that it's fully original. So this particular example is worth we're estimating it 40 to 60,000.
Whoa, I wasn't expecting you to say that much.
Yeah, no, and it's going to get a little wilder as we continue, but this one's 40 to 60,000, and it's still spendable. You could spend. I mean, you'd be a fool to spend Federal Reserve money, but all Federal Reserve money you could still spend. This right here, this is really cool. It's one of my favorite notes. This is a 1905 gold certificate.
Whoa, okay. What?
Yeah. So the story, you could go for days with the story of these, but the nuts and bolts are, it's called a Technicolor because it's hard to see with the glare here. My fault. But basically, it's got this like gold color, if you see it carefully, compared to like the plain white. So we call that a Technicolor.
Yeah.
This particular piece is a 67, which is, on the grading scale, you could imagine it's astronomical. And you're not going to find 70s with these large size notes just because the margins it was all hand cut. So the margins are never perfect, and you need perfect margins to get a 70. So 67 is pretty much as good as they come. Conservatively, we're estimating this one 80 to 120,000. And it'll probably exceed the high estimate just because of how clean, beautiful, and rare it is in this condition.
And when were these printed again?
This particular issue was 1905 is when it was circulated.
And they did obviously print a lot of them back then, but most of them just haven't.
They did. Just for context, this is serial number 40,433. So
it's not that high.
No, and when you think about what that was worth back then, a lot. And with all these older banknotes, and that's the important thing to remember, like when we're talking about this, $500 back in 1918 was a lot of money. So what did these people do? They turned it into the bank when it got remonetized, and we had the 1928 series.
So for something like the $500 bill, obviously that was worth a lot more than $500 back in the early 1900s. What sort of percentage or dollar increase is that up from then? Like, what was that worth back in the day?
It's probably over 1,000% in terms of where it's at back then to where it would be today. Quite a lot of money, which is why any type of high denominations were so sought after from collectors the moment it became a hobby. It was, hey, we need to get one of these because there's not going to be a lot of them out there. The cost to hold on to it back then, we're talking change your life money for a lot of people, especially back in the time. And we got to think, that people were coming out, there was the wars and all of that going on. And $500 was a whole lot of money back then, a whole lot of money, a lot of barrels of whiskey for guys like Al Capone. And, but then when we switched, we had other high denoms that were still printing high denomination money. And, there's stuff like this, which, we've had people call and say, hey, I've got a $5,000 bill. Is it real? Can I sell it to you? Well, do I take it to a bank? And the answer is, please don't ever take one of these to a bank. Call Aris or somebody who knows what they're doing with this kind of stuff. Because, this is at least $120,000, this bank.
What would the bank do? They would just take it and give you $5K?
Yeah, they would. And they would probably then send it to, headquarters, which would then send it to the US Mint or the Federal Reserve or whatever, which is foolish. This is the.
What would they do? How does that chain work? Do they put it in a museum or something like that?
Sometimes if it's special enough, they've reclaimed it and they'll come to the trade shows sometimes, and the US Mint sets up like a little table and they have all these old banknotes and stuff like that. But for the most part, it just gets destroyed. They certainly don't want it to go back into circulation, especially at this level. And for the most part, they did away with these high denominations because of like money laundering and things like that. So it became, lower denominations were the only ones that continue to exist. And, the cool thing about these pieces is there's only about 175 known of the 5,000 and about the same amount known of the 10,000.
Who's on those bills?
So on the 5,000 is Madison.
Wow.
And then on the 10,000 is Chase.
Wow.
And so the cool thing about my favorite little tidbit about the 10,000s is this particular set, it's a New York district, and it's from the Binion Hoard, which I don't know how familiar you are with Binion, but it's basically a casino guy, and he had this hotel, and what he did in Vegas was he did this horseshoe of $1 million, and it was like $1 million horseshoe, and there was 100 of these $10,000 notes in the horseshoe. So this exact note was part of the Binion Hoard. It was in that horseshoe.
Wow. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, so this is, and basically what happened is in the 2000s, all of those came to the collector market and they sold. And, most of them went into private collections and they're sitting there today, and they probably won't come about until somebody passes away or somebody decides, hey, I want to capitalize on this thriving market. But, this is probably, as an uncirculated example, a lot of them were uncirculated, but there are quite a few that have, their 45s or their 58s or 55s because there's toning, or, when they were mounted, there's a little rips and things like that. This particular example is probably between 100 and 150,000. And this is one of the Binion notes. So it's a cool little piece of American history. Definitely something when people see, they're like, oh, well, it's just like the 5,000. Can I spend it? Should I spend it? No, you should not. You should sell it and offer for a lot of money.
That's so crazy. I can't believe you have like $2 million sitting on your desk casually.
Yeah, it's funny because, it's after hours here at the office. Everybody's home. Probably there's only maybe the imaging department might still be here. And and it's mostly stuff that I don't typically handle. For the most part, I'm dealing with like really old world paper money, like these Filipino notes, or like these like Chinese dynasty notes.
Oh my God. When is that? Wait, we can't gloss over these so quickly. When is the Chinese dynasty note from?
Okay, so this is a 1856 Chinese banknote. Okay,
wow, dude, that is crazy.
There's only 2 that are in this grade, with none of them finer. So this is one of the finest examples. It's not a piece that, you know, you would see and think, oh, this is worth a lot of money, because there's a lot of them out there. But the majority of these, I mean, just for size, if I hold it up to my head, I mean,
Dude,
it's
I wouldn't even know that that was money. I would have thought
right.
that it was like a page out of a notebook.
Yeah, it's exactly what it looks like. Um, but it's a really neat piece. If you look at it, it's got like double dragons on each side. Um, and
That is cool.
it's just a really intricate piece. And in this condition, like I said, there's only 2 known. So value wise, it's got to be at minimum 5,000. But, you know,
That's it.
on the high end, it could be a lot higher. Yeah, the reason why it's not more money is because it's a year 6, which just basically means it's the 6th year for the series. And, you know, a year 1 in this grade would be, you know, 50, 60, 70, $80,000. But it's kind of like, you know, you have the 86 flare, then the 87 flare, then the 88 flare for Jordan.
You're buying his fourth or fifth year Jordan, right?
Yeah, exactly. But it's an unbelievable banknote. But you know, one of the cooler pieces I have, like just the story itself is interesting. Is this Canadian banknote, which it came from a collector who basically called us up on the phone and said, hey, I've got this banknote. I found it in a desk. Somebody called me up and told me that I should come back and pick it up. She sold the desk. This lady sold the desk. The guy's like, come back. This might be worth money. So she comes back, picks it up, starts Googling what to do with like old Canadian money. And thankfully, with our marketing department, if you do that, chances are you'll come across one of our landing pages. So a sweet old lady calls me up on the phone, says, hey, I've got this banknote, blah, 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 blah. Can you help me figure out what it's worth? I said, sure. Can you send me a picture? So she sends me a picture, and I'm looking at it. Now, Canadian banknotes at the time are the same size as U.S. money was, you know, the large, bigger notes. So condition is everything. 65 is a monster grade. And knowing what, you know, 55s bring, 45s bring, 30s bring, you know it's a $5,000 or $6,000 note on a bad day. But when it gets greater to 65, that's when you start dancing up and down the hallways, because, you know, it's like it's hitting a home run.
Right.
So, you know, you want to manage the expectations of anybody that's calling in with an inquiry saying, you know, hey, I've got this note. But, you know, she's talking to me and she's asking me what I think it's worth. And she thinks she could get a couple $100s for it. And I was like, it's not worth a couple $100. And I was like, it's worth at least a few thousand. And I mean, for 10, 15 seconds, I'm waiting for something on the other end, wondering if she like had a heart attack or something. And she's like, what? And you could hear like the excitement in her voice, which was really cool. Because I mean, for us, it's a cool note. It's a big note. It doesn't really move the needle too much. But for someone like her, I mean, she sold an antique desk to a shop and had the note in it. You know what I mean? It's just one of those really weird stories. And I called her the other day to talk to her when it got graded, and basically told her our estimate is 20 to 30,000. Because at the time I told her it was about 5K. Right. Give or take. And I mean, she's floored. I mean, she's retired. She's an old lady. She lives in Canada. And it's US dollars, not Canadian dollars, which is even more in her favor. Yeah. So pretty excited about it. I mean, the condition is everything on this one. It's not so much rarity for the type. It's an available type. But with banknotes, you know, like I said, I mean, there's so many things that could go wrong in the history of the note. For it to get a gem uncirculated grade is just something that, you know, collectors noodle over.
It's super fun.
And, you know, it's interesting. I mean, you have sport cards, which I love. I mean, that's what I grew up collecting, is sport cards. And my uncle and my father were distributors. So they would get all of the boxes from Flair, from Pinnacle, from Topps, and they'd be, you know, a warehouse full of cards. And it was the coolest thing. And as a kid, you know, then Pogs and Slammers happened, and we had Pogs and Slammers, we had Pokemon, we had all of it. And, you know, as you know, with the card hobby, it pretty much died real quickly. And my dad, he went into like mergers and acquisitions and went back to like his previous, profession. And my uncle found the banknote world. So my entrance into all of this and the job I have today and everything was from him basically finding an alternative hobby. And if you go to like the Long Beach show, which is the Paper Money and Coin Expo, there's people who set up for sport cards and sport jerseys, and they've been doing it for decades. Well, that's kind of how he was exposed, because he was in that world and then found the paper money stuff because they were side by side at a show. And about 8 years ago, I was living in New York and I had a t-shirt business in Brooklyn, and was trying to figure out like what I'm going to do professionally. And he's like, hey, come to a show and, see what's up, and you could work my table for me and I'll give you some money, pay your hotel. And one of the things that got me is like, it's Chicago and you eat for free. So I was like, all right, I'm there, let's go, book it. So since then, it's just been like a learning experience. And just from the first show, you go to the show and you just walk table to table to table and you see things from all over the world that, it's so super fascinating, and everything has, some type of historical significance. And, you could get colonial US paper money that was actually printed by Ben Franklin. And that's something that I'm sure you're going to need on that wall back there. So,
that one.
Yeah. And I wish I had one on hand to show you, but like I said, we just had our auction, so we don't have any right now. But when I do get some in, I'll send you some pictures of them, because they're really cool pieces of colonial currency, which is for the period. Back when we had colonies, this was the money that we used. And, there's Confederate money because the Confederacy needed their money. There's, obsolete broken bank money, which is basically before we had the Federal Reserve. We had all these, banks in all these little areas. There's so much cool stuff when you think about the history of how societies have been able to pay each other. And that's all something that you can see in the hobby of coins and paper money. Is it's like, all right, all these different types of forms of payment, and they're all unique, they're all strange, but it's really cool. And if you could find, some people, if I'm Greek, so there's Greek paper money that I could relate to because they're from my little island of Crete that my grandpa was from and he probably spent. So I want that, right? And then there's, guys from Brazil that want the Brazilian paper money that their ancestors probably, spent. And that's how the hobby starts. And you start getting that collector bug, and like anything, it just can't really stop once you get going.
I love that. I'm gonna need some colonial dollars. I don't know. Have you ever heard of a free franc? Are you familiar with what those are?
A free franc?
Yeah. So
No.
what a free franc is for the first few presidents, so Washington, Adams, Jefferson, and a few others, instead of putting a postage stamp on an envelope, when you were the president of the United States early on in the US, all you had to do was sign the top left corner of the envelope, and that acted as a stamp because you're the president of the United States. So they're out there, free francs signed by Jefferson, Adams, Washington, where their signature acts as a postage stamp.
I need to have one of those. What does something like that go for? That's got to be up there, right? Especially authenticated.
Not these kind of prices you're talking about. You can get you can get a good, probably graded wash. There aren't that many, so you have to find them first. But if you find one, 15 to 20,000.
Time to liquidate some of the collection. That's just segue into like free francs. Oh, that's awesome. What a cool story. See, that's something that, to me, I love that story. The story resonates with me. Like, I gotta have one now because that story is just too cool.
Too cool. And likewise for yours, like, I want colonial currency printed by Ben Franklin. I think he's an all-time undervalued part of the country. Just because he wasn't a president doesn't mean,
all time
have immense historical significance.
All time. You even see it today. Like, a lot of people don't know, like basketball fans. I was watching basketball with a buddy of mine, and the 76ers, they have the snake on the floor cut into 8 pieces.
Right.
And he didn't understand that was a Ben Franklin thing. And he was the guy that came up with that whole idea, or what it even meant. And he's just like, why is there a snake on the floor? It's like, well, let me tell you about Ben Franklin, man, because this guy is special. Definitely one of my all-time favorite historical figures is Ben Franklin. And on banknotes, he's on quite a lot of paper money. But fun factoid: no one's on more banknotes than Queen Elizabeth II. So when you're looking at like an opportunity that might, pay dividends soon, Queen Elizabeth II. And when you think about the Commonwealth and all the British countries and British colonial places, yeah. So
that's a pretty.
She's on more different banknotes than any other historical figure.
That's a super interesting fact. I would have thought that it would have been, I don't know, some other historical figure. But
yeah, no, and she benefited obviously because the Commonwealth was so big when paper money started to actually be used. Who are we going to put on it? I mean, we've got to put the queen, we've got to put the princess at the time, we've got to put, if there was a king, we got to put the king. Ultimately, especially, she's on all the Canadian money. She's obviously on all the British money. She's on the Bahamas money, all the British, Honduras, Belize, etc. She's on all of those banknotes. So it's absolutely wild. But yeah, fun little factoid. So we were talking a little bit about all the other types of money that existed and stuff like that. But I've got this cool piece I wanted to show off a little bit just because we were talking a little bit about bullion too. And it's kind of hard to show you because it's super heavy to lift, but this is a gold bar from a shipwreck, the SS Central.
No way.
Yep. You're familiar with the Shipwreck?
I'm not familiar with the Shipwreck, but I'm familiar with how much Shipwreck gold and silver is actually worth.
Yeah, big money. But this particular shipwreck was pretty wild. It happened off the coast of the Carolinas. And I forget the total amount of people that died, but I think it was something like 400. I want to say 420 people passed away on that shipwreck. It was a Category 2 hurricane that basically off the coast of the Carolinas that just beat the ship up. And
what year was this?
1857. Yeah, 1857. Thankfully, there's over 100 women and children got saved into lifeboats and sent on. And then there was another ship that came I think 3 days later, I want to say, but don't quote me on it, and rescued another 50 or so people. But yeah, 400 plus people perished in that shipwreck. And years later, in the 80s, there was a guy that went in and had investors treasure hunting, trying to find gold, and found this shipwreck and uncovered about 5% of what was supposed to be on there. It was called the Ship of Gold at the time because there was so much gold that was lost on this ship. And he ended up, long story short, he was shorting his investors. He didn't pay people back. He fled the country with his assistant, and he got extradited years later in the 2000s or something like that. And they basically said, you owe these people $18 million or something like that. And he couldn't pay him. He cried. He said, I'm going to give you 5,000 gold coins or something to that effect. And he just flaked and said, I don't have the gold coins and blah, blah, blah. But this particular bar is 128 ounces.
Oh my gosh.
So,
and gold is 1,800 an ounce.
Yeah, it went down a little bit this week. It's at 1,750 last time I checked. But yeah, it's stupid money. And at the time, this was $2,300 in value. So that's basically an ounce and 1.6 ounces or something like that today. But yeah, this is just a massive bar. So
story and all, what is that worth?
We're gonna offer it to some of our distinguished clients first. Usually when we get a piece like this, it's we send an email out to about 30 to 50 of our top buyers of this kind of material. and it's a first come, first serve. Whoever responds first, basically, or calls our president on the company gets it. But I think we're going to offer it probably around 375 will be about what we offer for the gold. The melt value is about 230 or 240,000, but because of obviously shipwreck and all of that, carries a big premium. So
Speaking of shipwrecks, obviously the most famous being the Titanic. I know some coins have been discovered, or rather, unearthed from the shipwreck, or have come off of survivors, like have come out of their pockets when they got out safe. Have any of those ever come through your auctions or your shops?
yeah, there's been a lot of Mexican and Panamanian gold that has come about, and those, they always carry premiums, but they are really hard to authenticate because a lot of this stuff was also just commonly issued in
Right.
the areas. So it's like, oh well, this is from the shipwreck. Well, is it really? Do we know that for sure? Um, but there are some that do carry a provenance that shows that it's from the shipwreck, and when it does do that, it does carry a bit of a premium. So those are always sought after. They're, I mean, the multiple of what a shipwreck coin is versus what the regular version is, it's kind of hard. It's a bit of the story and how strong that story is. And like anything, if you're a Carolina guy and you love gold, this story pertains to you with the SS Central America. But if you're a guy from Texas and you don't like the Carolinas, then maybe you're not as intrigued by it. So like anything, it's, well, how much will someone pay for it? If we were to put this in auction and there were two guys that wanted it, it might fetch more than what we're asking for. And that's the name of the game. It's like, well, what's the best way to do it, etc. But pieces like this we get every so often, not usually this heavy. Usually it's like 30 ounces or 20 ounces or something, and we auction those off. But we wanted to do something cool, and we've had a cool year, so we just thought it might be a nice thing to just throw out there and see what happens. So in the event we somehow can't sell it privately, we'll end up auctioning it, and we'll just let the chips fall where they may. But usually something like that, we'll start it at melt and it'll go from there.
That's super cool. So the Zanzibar banknotes. What is the significance of the Zanzibar banknotes?
Those steaks sizzle the most. That's how we kind of explain Zanzibar for world paper. Um, they are extremely, extremely rare banknotes from this tiny little archipelago off the coast of Tanzania that was maybe if you look in the entire world, there might be about 25 total pieces known for all the denominations. That's the 1, the 5, the 10, the 20, the 100, and then of course the fabled 500, which I only know of one. That was actually a specimen, so it wasn't actually distributed and sent out into the world. But the denominations were in rupees, but at the time a 5 rupee was quite a lot of money, and the tens and all the higher denominations are just non-existent. And they're bigger pieces of currency. They're about, so here's our regular size again for reference, and then here's the Filipino note. The Zanzibar note is about 10 to 15% bigger than this note. So it's probably about the size of the holder, give or take. And those are just pieces that anytime you see them anywhere, it's cause for excitement. There's not a Zanzibar banknote that I've seen sell for less than 20,000 in any condition. They're just super, super rare. There's in the banknote world, there's multiple different printing companies, but the major ones are Waterloo and Sons, Thomas Delarue, American Banknote Company. These Zanzibar notes were all printed by Waterloo and Sons, with the exception of the 1 rupee, which was printed by TDLR, Thomas Delarose. So for collectors, some people only want the TLDR one, and other people only want all the other denominations. And there's all this like debate about why they didn't get the 1 rupee also, and they got to print the other ones, and all of that. It's a really interesting story, but for the most part, the nuts and bolts are tiny island. The money was all remonetized. You could turn it in and get Tanzanian currency, so nobody really kept the money. Very few survivors, very few in denominations above 5, and very hard to get above that 30 grade. There's maybe 3 or 4 pieces that have been above a 35, one of which we sold in auction for over $100,000. So it's like, we're talking a lot of money for a country that most people don't know even exists. But fun fact, Freddie Mercury from Queen is from Zanzibar. Or his family was from Zanzibar.
That's pretty cool.
I heard that in the movie when I watched the movie, and I was like, oh shit, world currency.
Right.
Let's go. I got super pumped up about that.
Add a little extra premium for that.
Yeah.
So last question I have for you here. What piece of advice would you give to anybody, like myself even, who wants to get into the paper currency and coin world, but doesn't really know where to start? What is a good place to learn more about it? Because
Right.
there aren't that many sort of shows like these beyond obviously what we've done so far here. And what would you recommend ways for people to get educated in the direction to start?
Sure. For starters, I would say, when you're looking at prices, a lot of people, just like with other hobbies, they'll look at eBay comps and things like that. With banknotes and coins, I would stick to the auction houses. There's a few of us, if you just Google, currency or coin auction houses, will all come up. But combing through archives is a really good way to learn, because you'll not just see the prices of what things are going for, but there's catalog descriptions, with banknotes or with coins. Let me see if I have something here. I have the write-up, like the write-up for the gold bar, for instance. This is our write-up for it.
Oh, wow.
It's massive, and it's front back. So, for coins, it's not that extensive neither, but, there's 5 or 6 paragraphs on a lot of these bigger items, and you learn a lot about it from there. Like on the large size notes, we'll talk about how, it's started in 1861 before, and then 1928 we went to small size and blah, blah, blah. So you'll learn a lot about the hobby from reading through archives or catalogs. There's not a lot of websites that you can go to just ascertain this information, or it's hard. It's Googling it, you'll come across these little niche sites that were made with like Microsoft Paint, and you'll see like all these like weird little things. But if any of your viewers on your show are genuinely interested and want to learn, they could reach out to me, and I'll supply them with a whole bunch of reading material. We've got probably the biggest library for numismatics in the country. And that's mainly because one of the named partners of our company is an author, and he just has every book that's ever been written on the topics. So we have duplicates, triplets, and there's shelves with all the same book. So I've got plenty of stuff that I can send to people, or I can just give them links online if they prefer to stay on a tab, something like that. But definitely looking at auction archives, reading catalog descriptions. That's how I learned. And then coming to shows. Once this pandemic is behind us and we start opening up shows, there's hundreds of dealers. No exaggeration. You go to a show, there's hundreds of dealers that will sit there and talk banknotes, talk coins, talk bullion with anybody that wants to listen, because it's something that, these guys are some of the most passionate collectors I've ever seen for any type of collectability, any type of hobby or any of that. These guys just love what they do. They're all kids playing in the stand.
And normally they've got nobody to talk to about it.
Yeah, that's the truth too. A lot of these guys, I can't tell you how many people call us up and say, yeah, granddad's had all this stuff in these bins and he passed away and left it to us, and now we need to sell it. We don't know what it's worth. We don't really care. They send it to us, and then, 6 months later, they get a check for like 50,000 and they're like, whoa, wait, what's this was in the basement? But, you know, sometimes it pays to listen to what our grandparents are talking about. You know, if I listened sooner, I'd have been in a much better position today. But, you know, we live and we learn.
Hey, you definitely can learn everything that's going to happen in the future from the past. So that's
100%.
Awesome, man. Well, this was such a pleasure. We'll include all the ways to find you and your guys' auction in the description. And yeah, man, thanks again. This is super fun.
Thanks for having me, man. I really appreciate it. And it was fun to talk shop with you.
Boom. All right. See everybody next time. Peace.